Go over lesson 5 and 6 for pre-calculus. Lesson 5 is about point slope form of a line. Lesson 6 is about standard form of a line. Okay? And so we're kind of putting those together. Do you remember what point slope form of a line is? Point slope form of a line is what? Y minus y sub 1 equal slope times x minus x sub 1. There's the point slope form of a line. So we need to know that. We need to know slope intercept form of a line. What slope intercept form of a line? Y equal mx plus b. And we need to know standard form of a line. And standard form of a line is ax plus by equal c. Now, today's lesson is going to be to start with some points, write them in point slope form, transform them into slope intercept form, and then transform it on into standard form. So going from one form to the other. Now, if we're going to write something in point slope form, what do we need to have to plug in? There's a hint. Point and slope. If we're going to put something in point slope form, we have to plug in a point and the slope. So we need a point to plug in the slope. Well, we've already got a point to plug in. Notice I'm leaving some space. We can plug in the point negative 3, 7, or we could have plugged in the other point, right? So we've got a point to plug in like negative 3, 7, but we also need the slope to plug in. Now, how do we find our slope? Well, I'm going to show you two ways. We could say slope is change in over change in x. And we could just look. What is the change in y from 7 to 8? Plus 1. What is the change in x from negative 3 to 2? Negative 3, negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You have to think through that 0, right? Which is 1/5. So you could find your slope by doing your change in y gain of 1 over change in x gain of 5. Or we can use a formula, right? Y minus y sub 1 over x minus x sub 1. Remember your slope formula, which we need to know how to use because it's going to show up again. If we use the slope formula, then we take the y of the first point 7 minus the y of the second point 8 over the x of the first point negative 3 minus the x of the second point 2. 7 minus 8 is negative 1. Negative 3 minus 2 is negative 5. When you divide with the same sign, the answer is positive. So you can just look at it and say it went up 1, it went up 5, 1/5. Or you can do the fancy mathematics and still get a fifth. Okay? So we have a point to plug in, and we have the slope to plug in. And we're going to plug those into the point slope formula. Y minus y sub 1 is equal to slope times x minus x sub 1. So the y of the point goes in place of y. The x of the point goes in place of x. And the slope goes in place of m, correct? So we get the y minus the y of 7 is equal to the slope 1/5 times x. Now we got to be careful, right? We have minus a negative 3, and minus a negative is a plus 3. Everybody understand that? Be careful plugging in when there's a minus in the formula. Understands why that turned into a plus 3. Now, That's the first thing it told us to do. First thing it told us to do is to write it in point-slope form, and we're going to label that as point-slope so that we know what we have. And the next thing it said to do was change it into slope-intercept. How do you go from point-slope to slope-intercept? Well, look at what this looks like. There's not any parentheses, and the y is all by itself. To get rid of the parenthesis, you do what? Distribute. Whoops. So we distributed the 1/5. And now we need to get the y all alone, right? Because the y by itself, slope-intercept. We didn't need a parenthesis, and the y needs to be itself. So we're going to add 7. And so we have y is equal to 1/5 x plus. Now we got two choices. We could make it 7 3/5, or we could leave it and make it improper, right? If we made it improper, we would have 5 times 7 is 35 plus 3 is 38/5. 7 3/5. 7 times 5 is 35 plus 3 is 38 of those little fifths, right? We're just going to leave it improper. And so now we have it in slope-intercept form. I'm just going to move that over here. I'll get out of the way in just a second. 38/5. The last thing it asks us to do is change it to standard form. Now, why does what we have not look like standard form? Well, the x is on the wrong side. See that? We need to move the x over. But what else is true about standard form? You remember the fine print of standard form? ax plus by equals c, where? Correct. Where a, b, and c are integers, and a has to be positive, right? A, b, and c have to all be integers, no decimals or fractions, and the a has to be positive. All right, so we need to move the x to the other side, remembering to change the sign when we cross over. We're going to have negative 1/5 x plus y equal 38/5. It's in the right order, x stuff, y stuff, number, but you can't have any fractions, and a has to be positive, so we have to fix those problems, right? Now, how are we going to fix that divided by 5 problem? See that divided by 5 problem? Well, we're going to multiply by 5. How are we going to get rid of that negative on the a? Make that a negative 5. So multiplying by negative changes the sign of a, and multiplying by 5 gets rid of those denominators, right? So we're going to make there not be any fractions, all integers, where the a integer is a positive integer. So negative 5 times negative 1/5 is positive 1x. And then negative 5 times y. People forget to distribute. Negative 5 times y is negative 5y. And what you do to the left side, you have to do to the right side. And right here, the 5's would cross-reduce to 1, but that would be a negative 1, right? And negative 1 times 38 is negative 38. So standard form is x minus 5y equal negative 38. So we wrote it in point-slope form, transformed it to slope-intercept form, and then transformed it into standard form. Any questions on number 1? Any questions? Okay, are you ready? I was going to pause it. It didn't pause, so I just left it running. Yeah, still going. Okay, I'll let you catch up. That'll give whoever's watching time to catch up also. It's a lot of stuff, isn't it? Yeah. All right, we good? All right, let's look at number 2. Maybe I'll slow down just a little bit on number 2. If I get to going too fast, let me know. I get excited about this sometimes. All right, we want to write it in point-slope form first. This is number 2. And so for number 2, we need a point and the so that we can plug it into point-slope form. Y minus y sub 1 is equal to slope times x minus x sub 1. We have a point. What we don't have is a slope, so we need to get our slope. I'm going to let you do the slope in your head. If you need to use the formula, that's fine. Slope is change in y over change in x. And what's the change in y when you go from 5 to 6? 1. And what's the change in x when you go from 3 to negative 4? Well, from 3 to 0 is 3, and to negative 4 is 4 more. So that's 7 moves, right, from 3 to negative 4? But it was negative 7 because you went down, right? But we don't put the negative on top. We would make it negative 1/7 because we don't like to leave a negative in the denominator. That's kind of a no-no to do that, right? So my slope is negative 1/7. Everybody good there? So we're going to put the y of the point in place of y, the x of the point in place of x sub 1, y sub 1, and we're going to put the slope in place of m for slope. So we get y minus the y of the point 5 is equal to our slope of 1/7 times the x minus the x of the point 3. That is the answer in point-slope form, which is the first thing that they told us to do. Any questions on that? So let's just plug it in. The next thing they've asked us to do is change it into slope-intercept form. Slope-intercept form doesn't have parentheses and the y is by itself. To get rid of the parenthesis problem, we distribute. So we're going to have y minus 5 is equal to 1/7 x minus 3/7. Understand so far? Good. Why didn't we carry the negative? Oh, I lost it. Thank you. You're right. That was a negative 1/7. Thank you very much. The slope was negative 1/7. So that makes that a negative 1/7 x. And then a negative 1/7 times a positive negative 3 is a positive 3/7. So thank you. Yeah. All right. So we fixed the parenthesis problem. Now we got to get the 5 off of the y. So we're going to add 5 to both sides. And we're going to have y is equal to negative 1/7 x. And then 5 plus 3/7 is 5 and 3/7, but we prefer it improper because of the application. So we would say 5 times 7 is 35 plus 3 is 38 of those little sevenths. And so there it is in slope-intercept form, which is the second thing they ask us to do. Any questions so far? It is a lot of stuff. Remember this in Algebra 1? Oh, we retested and retested and retested in tutorials. It took forever to get everybody to pass this. It seems to be challenging for folks. The next thing we want to do is we need to go from slope-intercept to standard. And what does standard form look like again? Good. AX plus BY equals C, where A, B, and C are, and A is usually positive. So to make it look like that, we got to move the X to the other side. Remembering to change the sign when you cross over. I'm going to put it over here. We're going to have 1/7 X plus Y is equal to 38/7. So we've got to go to the fine print part of standard form, which says they have to be integers and A has to be positive. This is not an integer. That's not an integer, so we have to fix those so that they're not fractions. The thing that made it was a fraction was the denominator. A is positive, so we don't have the problem of a negative this time. So all we need to do is multiply through by the denominator 7 to make there not be any fractions. And so we're going to distribute, and the 7s would cancel, and we get X, but we can't forget to hit the Y. 7 times Y is 7Y. And then the 7s cancel there, and we get 38. And so there it is in standard form. Any questions on that? Everybody good with 1 and 2? Okay. Yeah, the tests for 5 and 6 will look like this, but your Wednesday test is 3 and 4, which was that graphing, point tables, graphs, and equations. Number 3. Now, you shouldn't even begin to do number 3. You should look at that and go, what? Ding, ding. There's a constant Y. And if there's a constant Y, that means that the equation is Y equal that constant Y. It's a horizontal line. There was a constant Y value. That's it in slope-intercept form. That's it in standard form. That's it in point-slope form. That's it. Now look what would have happened. Some of you would have done this. Don't write this down. This is what you don't do. Some of you would have said, okay, I want my change in Y over change in X. And so my change in Y is a 0, and my change in X is a 7, and 0 divided by 7 is, and you'd have tried to figure that out. Some of you would have put 7. Probably not in here. Some people always do. But the answer would be 0. But we know that what kind of a line has a slope of 0? A horizontal line. We should have that memorized. So if you were to run into a 0 in calculating slope, your brain should automatically say horizontal line, constant Y value, Y equal the constant Y value, Y equals 7. Okay? If we go to number 4, we should automatically recognize when we first look at it that there's a constant X. And if there is a constant X, then the equation is X equal that constant X value. It's a what kind of a line? It's a vertical line. What is the slope? Undefined. What is the y-intercept? It doesn't have one. If you were to try to find the slope, change in Y over change in X, you would get the change in Y is a -3, and the change in X is a 0. And if you put it in the calculator, it'd give you an error because division by 0 is undefined. And so that's all there is to those, is y equals 7, x equals 5. Any questions on 3 and 4? Okay. Now, what I've done on this page, which is actually lesson 6, because this is 5 and 6 together, is I started in all the 3 different forms and tell you to write it in the 2 that it's not in to start with. So first of all, what form of a line is number 5 in to start with? Slope-intercept. Now, do we know how to move it from slope-intercept to standard? What would we need to do to move it from slope-intercept to standard? We'd have to move the x, right? We've already practiced this. So we would move the x, remembering to change the sign when you cross over. That would give us negative 4x plus y equals 7. Anything wrong with that? You can't have a negative a, good. So we check out the fine print of standard form and we realize we have to have integers, no fractions or decimals. That's not a problem, but the fact that a is negative is a problem. And how do we fix that problem? Times by negative 1. We're not interested in changing the numerical value. We're interested in changing the sign. We want it to still be a 4. So we multiply through by negative 1, which changes the sign of the 4x to a positive. It changes the sign of the y to a negative, and it changes the sign of the 7, that's a negative 1 there, sorry, to a negative 7, and that's it in standard form. Whoops, standard form. So we already knew how to go from slope-intercept to standard. Move your x and fix all the messes, fractions and negative a's. Have we seen how to go from slope-intercept to point-slope? We have not. But we know this. We know that if we're going to write something in, notice I left a gap, point-slope form, y minus y sub 1 equals slope times x minus x sub 1. How did we get something in point-slope form a while ago? How did we get it in point-slope form? On the front page. Plugged in a point, plugged in the slope. We didn't transform it into it, we plugged into it, right? So we know that we've not learned how to transform into point-slope. All we know how to do is to plug into point-slope. And what you plug into point-slope is a point and the slope. Question is, do we know what a point is and what the slope is? And the answer is yes. Where do we have a point in the slope? In slope-intercept form. The slope is 4, and what's that? It's the y-intercept, which is the value of y when that's a point, right? So we think of the y-intercept as the ordered pair 0, 7, and we have the slope. So we have the point 0, 7 from slope-intercept form. We have the slope 4 from slope-intercept form. We're going to directly plug those into point-slope form. And we're going to have y minus 7 equals slope 4 times x minus 0. And that's it in point-slope form. How did we get it in point-slope form? Plugged in a point in the slope. Where did we get them? From slope-intercept form. Where did we get our point? It was the y-intercept. What was the y-intercept? Y when x is 0. Okay? Any questions on number 5? We started with slope-intercept, and we changed it to standard and point-slope. Okay? All right, very good there. Number 6, what form are we in to start with? point slope. Do we know how to go from point slope straight to standard? What did we do on the front page? We went from point slope to slope intercept to standard, right? We didn't go from point slope straight to standard. We went from point slope to slope intercept, then to standard. That's the order we have to do it, okay? How do you go from point slope to slope intercept? Distribute and then undo, correct? So we're going to have y plus 5 equal 3 times x is 3x. 3 times 7 is 21. Distribute, that got rid of the parentheses. And then we're going to undo minus 5. We get y equal 3x plus 16. And that's it in slope-intercept form. We know how to go from slope-intercept to standard. So we go from point slope to slope-intercept, then to standard. To go from slope-intercept to standard, what do? Move the x to the other side, remembering to change the sign when you cross over. And so we're going to get negative 3x plus for positive y equal positive 16. Then we have to check for the fact that a, b, and c must be integers, no fractions or decimals, and a needs to be positive. We have one problem, and that is the fact that a is negative. So how do we fix that problem? Distribute a negative 1 through. Very good. Negative 1 times negative 3 is positive 3x. Negative 1 times y is negative or minus 1y. And negative 1 times 16 is negative 16. And so there it is in standard form. So we started in point slope, moved to slope intercept, and then we moved on to standard. Okay? Any questions on number 6? Pretty good so far. All right. Number 7. Number 7, we started in what form? Standard. Question. Can you go from standard straight to point slope? No, because what's the only way to put it in point slope? Plug in a point and plug in the slope. The only way to get it in point slope is to plug in a point and a slope. Well, you can't see a point and slope in the standard form of a line. So we're going to have to go from standard form to what first? Slope-intercept form, right. And how do you go from standard to slope-intercept? Move your x to the other side, remembering to the sign when you cross over. So we'll have 3y equal negative, minus is a negative, 5x minus 12, right? Minuses and negatives were interchanging. We changed the minus to a negative and the negative to a minus. But we still got junk on the y. So we need to undo multiplication by division to get the y by itself. We're going to put this. And so we're going to have y equal negative 5 divide 3x. And then negative 12 divide 3 is negative 4. So that's it in slope-intercept form. Understand that? So we move the x to the other side, remembering to change the sign when we cross over. We undid multiplication by division, and we had to distribute the 3. Okay? Now, to put it in point slope, we have to plug in a point and the slope. It's the only way to get it in point slope. So do we have a point now? Yes. In slope-intercept form, the negative 4 is the negative 4 is the y-intercept, which is the value of y when And so from slope-intercept form, we have the point 0, negative 4, and the slope, negative 5/3, right? So once it's in slope-intercept, we use the y-intercept as a point and then the slope, and then we just plug it straight into point-slope. So we're going to take the y of the point in place of y, the x of the point in place of x, slope in place of m. We have y minus. Now we got to be careful because we have minus a negative, and minus a negative is a positive 4. Let's see how that turned into a positive 4, plus 4. Equals slope, which is negative 5/3, times x minus 0. Now, it wanted it in point-slope form, so we stopped right there because we just put it in point-slope by substitution. Okay? Any questions on number 7? We started with standard. We moved to slope-intercept. That gave us a point and the slope to plug into point-slope. Okay? Any questions on number 7? Question? Okay. Number 8. Number 8 is in what form to start with? It's in It's in slope-intercept form to start with. If we're going to go from slope-intercept to standard, what do? Move the x to the other side, remembering to change the sign when you cross over. So we get negative 3/7 x plus y equal 5. Let's see what we got to there. Then we have to check for fractions, decimals, and negative for a, right? So what problems do we face? A fraction and a can't be negative. How do we fix both problems at once? Times by negative what? 7. That's going to take care of the negative problem and the 7 problem, so we're left with the 3x, right? We took care of the negative, we took care of the 7. The only thing left is the 3 on the x. Negative 7 times y is negative 7y. And 5 times negative 7 is negative 35. And so here it is in standard form. Okay. Now, the other form we haven't put it in is what form? Point slope. And what's the only way we know to put it in point slope? Plug in a point in the slope. Direct substitution. And from what other form can we find a point in the slope? Slope-intercept form. Because in slope-intercept form, that coefficient of x is the slope, but what about our point? That plus 5 is the y-intercept, which is the value of y when x is 0. So we write the y-intercept as a point. And then we put the y of the point in place of y, slope in place of slope, x in place of x, direct substitution. Y minus the y of 5 equals slope 3/7 times x minus the x of 0, and that's it in point slope form. Any questions on number 8? Okay. Now, number 9 is in a distorted version of standard form. Some textbooks will actually call it standard form. Okay. If we were going to make it proper, the standard form we've talked about, we would move that 4 across, right? and that would give us 2x plus 3y equal negative 4, and that would be what we've called standard form. Again, when you get into college algebra, sometimes they'll call what you see standard form. Okay? Now, to get that into slope-intercept, we have to move the x to the other side, remembering to change the sign when you cross over, and we'll have 3y equal negative 2x minus 4. So we move the x. Now we isolate the y by dividing. We have to remember to distribute that divided by 3. And so we're going to have y is equal to negative 2 divide 3x minus 4 divide 3. And that's it in slope-intercept form. You understand that? So we went from new standard form to old standard form, from old standard form to slope-intercept form, and then back to the old scenario. How do you put it in point-slope? You plug in a point. The y-intercept is y when x is 0, so it's 0 to negative 4/3. And you plug in the slope, which was the negative 2/3, into our point slope formula. Y minus y sub 1 equals slope times x minus x sub 1. So we put the y in place of y, the x in place of x, and the slope in place of slope. Now we got to be careful. We have y minus a negative makes a positive 4/3. Whoops. Equal slope, which is negative 2/3, times x minus the x of 0, and there we have it in point slope form. Any questions on lesson 5 and 6? Going from slope-intercept to point slope to standard, from standard to slope-intercept to point slope to slope-intercept to standard, slope-intercept to standard, from slope-intercept to point slope, or just taking 2 points and doing all that with it. Don't forget your horizontal and vertical that we threw in there. Those are the easy ones if you just remember. Any questions on any of that? All right. Appreciate your attention.